Happy We are almost through the first week of fantasy football playoffs, and all I can say about yesterday is, whew, it was a doozy. There were so many underperforming players, so many things that went wrong for so many people's studs that just didn't deliver. But on the flip side, so many things that went right for people. If you had to plug into your lineup due to either injury, just whatever was going on, that went right and helped you get through it. So we're going to talk about all that today. But you guys know what it is. It's Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I'm your host, Britt Flinn. Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, especially in playoff fantasy football, we have a ton to talk about. We're foregoing the bold predictions today, and we are going to actually have a fantasy football therapy session to talk about what went wrong and what went right for you. I've got some of your comments that came in from Twitter. I also want you to put your comments in the chat. We are just going to hash this all out, get our feelings out. And our producer, Brian Burns, has thankfully agreed to moonlight as a therapist on the side. So he will be my therapist. We will start with that through the session. But of course, we've got a Sunday night recap to go through. We're going to talk about tonight's showdown slate, and we're going to give some sleeper picks for tonight. So, Sellers, thank you so much for being in here. I always love it when you're in here, especially as somebody who was my therapist last night after the Dallas Cowboys game and all of our fantasy playoffs and everything that happened. But I'm just going to say that week 15 was very, very weird. It feels like this happens every year in the playoffs that somebody doesn't deliver. But this year it felt especially different as there were a lot of people who didn't deliver for you. But let's just jump right in. While you're there, like and subscribe. Thank you so much for being in the chat. We are getting through to the very end of the fantasy football season, so you're not going to want to miss any of our content that we've got up now until what's going on. And Sellers, yes, you need therapy from Amazon. If anybody doesn't know, he is a postal carrier. The holiday season has been very tough on him. So not only did he have to deal with week 15 yesterday, now he has to deal with Amazon and delivering packages. So God bless you, Sellers. Let's just jump right in though and do the Sunday night football recap. And I texted John and Pemba about this because we do our Sunday morning start sit show. It came in that very late in the week that there was going to be a massive storm, a deluge, not just with rain, but with winds potentially of 50 to 60 mile an hour. And I sent him a message in the afternoon slate and I said, it feels like we were hoodwinked a little bit by the weather report because by that time, everything had moved out. So I thought that everything that we had predicted on was just completely out the window, but it didn't actually go that way. So this game definitely fit the week 15 theme of things just not going well, either due to injuries or just bizarre usage, to be honest. Trevor Lawrence left with a concussion for the Jaguars. He was already playing on that bad ankle. And for the Ravens, unfortunately, running back Keaton Mitchell suffered what is believed to be a season ending leg injury. Very tough scene for the promising rookie. And just a PSA for everyone out there, can we stop sharing the video of that? It was not good. I do not want to see that. It was, yeah. My autoplay is on. I don't want to accidentally come across that. It was not great. The Ravens, with their win, are the first team in the AFC to punch their playoff ticket since the AFC is so tight right now. And they are on track to be the number one seed in the conference and to get that coveted bye. Now, the Jaguars, on the other hand, find themselves in a three-way tie, not just in the playoff picture, but in their own division, tied with the Indianapolis Colts and Houston Texans at 8-6 atop the AFC South. So let's just jump right in, talk a little bit about the Ravens. And, Lamar Jackson, passing wise, was not that great. He only threw for 171 yards, one touchdown, and one interception, but he did have 97 yards on the ground. This is something that we haven't really seen from him throughout the course of the season. That rushing ability that we all loved about him has not really been present. So seeing that come out last night was definitely promising if you had the cojones to start Lamar Jackson with that windstorm that did not actually end up happening. Tight end Isaiah Likely continued to fill in and look dominant in that Mark Andrews role. He had 5 receptions, 70 yards, and the lone passing touchdown for the Ravens. Gus Edwards also ended his streak of 2 weeks without a touchdown. He had 58 yards on 16 carries, which wasn't great, but he still did get that touchdown, which boosted his value. Keaton Mitchell, again, looked really good until that injury. He had 73 yards on 9 carries. Really unfortunate scene for a Ravens running back room that has just been plagued by injuries, not just this year, but it feels like forever. Outside of Likely, though, in the passing game, everyone else had a very, very unimpressive numbers. Jackson spread the ball around a ton, including to the running backs, and there wasn't one that stuck out. In fact, they all looked pretty bad, including Zay Flowers, as Sellers points out in the chat, with 1.67 fantasy points. After having that breakout game last week, it was just not a good day for Zay Flowers. Now, on the Jaguars side, Trevor Lawrence threw for a lot of yards, but they just could not get into the end zone. He threw for 264 yards with 1 touchdown, but that went to Jamal Agnew, who wasn't on anybody's fantasy team unless you're playing in a 20-team league. He also lost 2 fumbles, which has been a very big problem for him. So there were lots of memes, lots of things talking about Trevor Lawrence's fumbles. Ball security has been a big problem for him. And if you're relying on him for the rest of the playoffs, we're really going to watch that. Travis Etienne was also disappointing, which I kind of told you it would be. He still ended up as RB24 in PPR leagues, but only 31 rushing yards, 28 yards on 4 receptions. Those receptions are what saved him. 9.9 fantasy points as the RB24 in PPR leagues and RB28 in half PPR leagues. So, not exactly what you wanted to see out of a guy who looked very good in the early part of the season. He's just had a very lackluster second half of the season. And I'm not quite sure what's going on with him, whether it's the injury, whether it's the usage, just not quite sure. Again, Jamal Agnew was the leading receiver with 70 yards and a touchdown on just 2 receptions. So keep that in mind. His usage was not great. It was kind of like that blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while situation. And that touchdown was 64 yards. So had it not been for that, he would not have even sniffed that leading receiver role for the Jaguars. Zay Jones finished 5 for 59, could have been more, but he also left with an injury. Calvin Ridley, 5 for 39. We talked about him and his problems in that man coverage situation. And then Evan Ingram, only 4 for 28 after completely exploding last week against the Cleveland Browns. You hate to see it, especially at week 15, but I've come to expect it every single season. There is somebody who's going to underperform. It just so happened that there were several people who underperformed this week for us. So, going to be a very interesting Monday night game, which we'll also get into. And Robert, yeah, how about them Cowboys? It's not great. I was pretty sad about it. I even gave up screaming at the TV, and I was just sitting there watching it like the train wreck that it was. So let's dive into some top news, which there are a couple of headlines today. The most recent one that came through just before the show started is that the NFL is suspending Steelers safety DeMonte Casey without pay for the remainder of the season and any potential postseason games for the hit on Michael Pittman on Saturday's game. Per a source, he is expected to appeal that game, but that hit was just vicious. It was totally unnecessary. Um, Also causing Michael Pittman, who had a very good game up until that point, to go out for the remainder of the game. There's just no place for that. He had already been hit. There was no reason to come in and dive and hit him that way. But we'll wait and see what happens with that appeal. Nick Mullins for the Vikings will remain the starter in week 16, despite losing to the Bengals on Saturday afternoon. I feel like that had more to do with the Vikings defense breaking down than it did with Nick Mullins. He had a great game with Jordan Addison, a pretty decent game with Justin Jefferson dealing with injury. So, not all bad for him. He still looked great. Also, side note, can we just talk to the broadcasters trying to show his wife and kid, and then it always showing those 2 Bengals fans who were just pounding White Claws? I was very confused when they were talking about his kid. I was like, "Wait, where's his kid? What's going on? These are just people drinking White Claws." Kind of funny on the broadcast side, as a
Just take a
side
beer
note.
and get out of here, okay?
I mean, they definitely had several beers. Every time they panned to it, these people were not lacking in White Claws, that's for sure. The Pittsburgh Steelers, after the loss, have benched Mitch Trubisky for Mason Rudolph this week against the Bengals. We heard chants last week. They were chanting Mason Rudolph in the first quarter of that game. Seems like Mike Tomlin has finally listened, and the guy's going to get another chance. Now, is that going to be better than Mitch Trubisky? We don't really know. Their quarterback situation has been pretty bad since the Ben Roethlisberger retirement, so we're just going to have to wait and see. I feel like, though, that it downgrades every bit of us, or every bit of their offense going forward. And Sellers, yeah, they were basically us if we would have been at the game. Although they probably had much more money because they had much better seats than we would have. To wrap up the news, the playoff picture in the NFC is coming to light. The 49ers, Eagles, and Cowboys all clinched playoff berths in the NFC after losses by the Arizona Cardinals and Green Bay Packers. So at least we're starting to get a little clarity. That's one thing that I can say about the Cowboys' loss. At least we're in the playoffs. Now, is that going to help down the stretch? It's the Cowboys. We don't know. But we're gonna see. Thanks, Burns, for that. So let's jump into some injury news because there were a couple of significant injuries. Marquise Brown of the Cardinals left the game with a heel injury that he'd been nursing all week. He re-aggravated it and left. For the Baltimore Ravens, as we mentioned, Keaton Mitchell suffered that injury that is likely going to end his season. Jamar Chase also suffered a separated shoulder on Saturday, and Andrew Cooper pointed it out in Coop's fiasco that it was significant enough that they couldn't even do an MRI until today. They had to wait for the swelling to go down to even get an accurate reading on the MRI. So it is likely that he's going to miss some time. Pay attention to that waiver wire article on fantasyalarm.com because Tyler Boyd is probably going to be a hot pickup this week because of that injury. The Cowboys guard Zach Martin suffered a quad injury early on in the loss to the Bills. They were wrapping it, they were icing it. But the good news for them is that it's not as significant as they feared it to be. So hopefully he can come back next week against the Dolphins. Packers wide receiver Jaden Reed also suffered a toe injury on Sunday, forcing him out of the game. Now, he did rack up 17 fantasy points before that happened, but check his availability going forward. We talked about Colts wide receiver Michael Pittman getting hit by DeMonte Casey. He is in concussion protocol. And running back Zach Moss also suffered an arm slash shoulder injury. Now, they are saying that he, quote, feels good. They're going to monitor him throughout the week and he could be back. But Stefania Bell of ESPN also said that Jonathan Taylor could return this week. So temper your expectations for Moss regardless. As we mentioned, Zay Jones suffered a hamstring injury and Trevor Lawrence is in concussion protocol. If not, it could be CJ Beathard again, who, again, performed pretty well in the absence of Trevor Lawrence after he sprained his ankle 2 weeks ago. So, hint, hint, spoiler alert, he may also be on the waiver wire article as well. Chiefs running back Isaiah Pacheco, quote, will return this week after having shoulder surgery for a cleanup procedure. Patriots tight end Hunter Henry left Sunday's game with a knee injury. We don't yet know the severity of it, so keep an eye on that. I know that we aren't really about kickers, but we are going to go through every injury here for position players. And Giants kicker Randy Bullock did suffer a hamstring injury in the first quarter Sunday. So if you were somehow running with Randy Bullock, be aware of that. To wrap it up, a couple more quarterback injuries. Jets quarterback Zach Wilson did leave with a head injury in the fourth quarter, leaving Trevor Siemian as the potential starter for week 16. Now, where it gets interesting with this is that Aaron Rodgers has supposedly been medically cleared to return in week 16. Is he going to return now that they've been eliminated from playoffs to play behind that offensive line that got him injured in the first place? Or is it going to be Simeon going forward? So that is definitely something that we're watching. They're playing for pride at this point. I would not be surprised if it is Simeon the rest of the regular season. And then Tennessee Titans quarterback Will Levis suffered a leg injury in overtime versus the Houston Texans. They did come out and say that it's not as severe as they initially thought. that it seems similar to that ankle injury that Ryan Tannehill suffered last year, but that still kept him out a couple of games. So we may see Malik Willis under center for the rest of the game or rest of the season. Just not great all the way around. With all the quarterback injuries that have happened, we have just been scrubbing the bottom of the barrel, trying to find somebody to fill in, not only for our quarterback position, but for those of us who play super flex to play in our super flex position. So just not great all the way around. And I see you in the chat. Great to see you. I really am so glad that you played the Raiders defense, and we'll get into that right now, actually, as we go into our fantasy studs and duds. The quarterback, it was Jared Goff leading the way. He had 5 touchdowns, 31.1 fantasy points. He had had a couple down weeks, even at home, even in the dome, but he came back in a big way, especially with Sam Laporta, and my Laporta potty teams are still fighting on in the playoffs. Next, it was Baker Mayfield with 29 points, and he set a historic record because up until now, it had only been Aaron Rodgers to have a perfect passer rating in Lambeau Field. After yesterday's game, now Baker Mayfield sits there in that elite company with Aaron Rodgers. So that was something crazy to see. And then Aiden O'Connell kind of came out of nowhere to finish as QB3 on the week going into tonight with 25.9 points. For the running back, CMC, James Cook, and Jameer Gibbs as the top three. CMC really has to be in top consideration for that MVP discussion right now. Dak has fallen out. Depending on whether or not Jalen Hurts plays tonight, he may fall down some more. Yes, Brock Purdy has been good, but McCaffrey has been just so great, both in the rushing game and in the passing game, that I don't know if Brock Purdy could do it without him. So there is an argument to be made for CMC as MVP. Next up, hurts me to say it, but James Cook, 36.1 points, and then Jameer Gibbs. For wide receiver, we had Jordan Addison, who put up that 2 touchdown performance. Jalen Waddle, who I admittedly, if you watched Friday's show, I was not high on. I thought that Tyreek Hill would work out of the slot, that Jalen Waddle would draw that outside coverage. But with Tyreek Hill out, it feels like they were able to move him around. And with just how dominant the Dolphins defense was, or Dolphins offense was, it seemed like the Jets defense got tired and was not able to cover Waddle to save their lives. And then it was Terry McLaurin kind of coming out of nowhere. 26.1 points, could have been higher had that last throw by Jacoby Brissett been ruled a touchdown, but they actually ruled him down on the 1 yard line. He had an incredible game. Kudos to him going up against a semi tough Rams secondary. For tight end, again, my boy, Sam Laporta, 3 touchdowns, 28.6 points. Then it was David Njoku with 26.4, and third, Trey McBride at 20.2. I kind of feel like McBride could have had a better game had he not gone out and got checked for that shoulder injury. And again, I was totally wrong on him. I thought that San Francisco defense was going to shut down that tight end position, but McBride was just such a focal point of that offense. And he's so big and athletic that he was able to make those catches that were not even accurate that went his way. He is just a monster, has to be in big consideration, especially in dynasty leagues for next season. If you can trade for him, let's go get him. For the defense, we mentioned Ann Raiders, 25 points. Could have been more, but again, the Chargers got a little bit in garbage time. The Miami Dolphins with 24, and then the Bears with 17. Now, going to the duds, we're just going to bring the mood down just a little bit because the first quarterback that I have to talk about is Dak Prescott. He was QB 30 with 7.1 fantasy points. This guy, I have been touting him since the bye because he is the overall QB1 since Dallas's bye. But for whatever reason, whether it was just game planning, whether it was the weather, I'm not really sure what happened, whether it was Zach Martin going out. Dak Prescott just could not get anything going, nor could the Dallas defense as a whole. Very disappointed. And it did cost me a playoff spot because I started him against our own Howard Bender. Not very stoked about that. Justin Fields also did not have a great game, finishing his QB 24 with 11.6 points. There are some people on Twitter saying that they only had one offensive touchdown where it should have been three. But you know what? Shoulda, woulda, coulda. It is what it is. 11.6 points is not going to get it done. And with Justin Fields, it's really disappointing. You expect him to get some stuff done with his legs. You expect him to throw to DJ Moore and have a great game, especially with the problems that the Browns had in their secondary. And he couldn't do it. For running back, again, I have chills right now talking about this running back because I'm so viscerally affected by what is going on. But it was Bijan Robinson, running back 73 with point 0.4 fantasy points. In a league that I play in, they take away extra, and he got a negative zero point 0.6.
That's terrible.
It was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. Arthur Smith, what are you doing? We will elaborate on this in our fantasy therapy session forward because I have lots of thoughts on this, but I'm pretty sure that I was not the only one affected by Bijan in these playoffs. Another one was Najee Harris, RB 70 with 1.3 fantasy points in PPR. What are you doing here? Just what are we doing? You got rid of Matt Canada. You're not improving. You don't look good. And then Brees Hall, RB 59 with 2.8 fantasy points after putting up almost 30 last week. What is going on? Sellers already mentioned it with the wide receivers. Zay Flowers, wide receiver 97 with 1.7 fantasy points. Lamar was just spreading the ball all the way around. Likely was it, and then it was everybody else. Just super disappointing. Again, coming off a very big game last week. Brandon Cooks, wide receiver 79 with just 3 fantasy points in what was supposed to be a very big shootout, the highest game total of the entire week. And then DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver 73 with just 4.1 fantasy points. For tight end, I'm going to throw my boy Travis Kelce under the bus. Tight end 20 with 7.8 fantasy points. He kept getting targets in the end zone. It wasn't like he wasn't being targeted. He could just not come down with it. Really disappointing in what should have been a good matchup for him. And he's been pretty disappointing, honestly, through the entire season. After the midway point, he's just fallen off. And I don't know if you can continue to trust Travis Kelce. Next up is George Kittle, tight end 22 with 7.4 fantasy points. Where's that 3 touchdown game? We get a 3 touchdown game from him every single year. When is it coming? Evan Ingram, obviously last night's game, tight end 25 with 6.8 fantasy points. But then Dalton Kincaid with 0 points. Now, we were told all week that he had been limited, that he was dealing with a thumb shoulder injury, but then he came in with no injury designation. Dallas has been a little susceptible to the tight end. How do Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox not get any looks? I realized that it was game script. I realized that James Cook had a ton of receptions, but how does this happen? How does this happen? 0 points is just unacceptable. All right, so I'm done lamenting for now because we are going to get into our fantasy football therapy session. But I want to know if you guys have downloaded the BetterCast app yet, because we have a ton of stuff going on in the BetterCast app. College football is going on right now. We also have a ton of NFL games spread out since it is the end of the season. There are a ton of primetime games. You can compete in our free contest, answer the pregame prop questions, answer the questions throughout the game, chat with our community as the game goes on. And then if you win tickets to redeem for real, authentic merchandise. There's no purchase or subscription necessary. It's always free to play. Just download that app, scan the QR code on our screen, or go to the Apple app and Google Play stores and get in the game with us as we continue to gamify all of the NFL, NBA, and college football. We also have our Fantasy Alarm All Pro subscription, which, as we know, fantasy football is winding down, but baseball season is right around the corner. So our All Pro subscription includes every single tool, every single sport, access to our experts in Discord, everything that you're going to need. And go to fantasyalarm.com/win to sign up today. Use promo code Let's Go for 50% off your first month, and you will get everything that our site has to offer. Scan that QR code on the screen, and it will take you right there so that you can become part of the family. And we're always looking for more family members. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, but if you're looking for some DFS plays for tonight's doubleheader matchup, and no, I did not ignore you, Grumpy Sports Fan, I'm going to talk about your question next. Don't go anywhere because we're going to talk about DFS heavy hitters and mid-tier plays after this break.
Of the NHL games, I had a conversation with Coop A Fiasco yesterday when we were producing High Stakes, and he was talking about playing video games. And I, since he covers fantasy football, I said, "Hey, are you going to be getting the new Madden this year?" And he goes, "Yeah, I don't really play Madden. I play NHL." And that tells you, and it really does, that I do feel that the NHL game is better than Madden. I feel like Madden is overrated. The NHL game is so realistic. I don't know if you guys saw the trailer and all the new additions that they added to this game, but it really looks good. I tried finding all the games that I had of NHL, and I thought I had a lot. I only have 4 of them. And that's because I used to live with my my roommate and good friend who got me into hockey, and we would play most of it in his house. So he has most of the games, but I do got 21.
There you go.
I got NHL 18. We got Connor McDavid up there. NHL 12, I think, was the start of the new consoles for me. But the big one, the holy grail of NHL games. NHL 94 for the Sega Genesis right there. Look at that. Look at that beautiful cover. Look at it. Looks like a VHS tape. That's how good this game is.
No, let me stop you right there. So people, a VHS tape, if you don't know, it's this like rectangular black plastic with the magnetic tape on the inside. Tape's this big. You put it in something called a VCR. For a little while, there was something called Beta. It didn't last too long.
Look at this cartridge. I mean, they're not cartridges anymore. They're either discs or those little memory cards. But man, that thing is thick, right? And
you don't even need a cartridge or a disc anymore. You can buy the digital version. And
then you got Ron Barr on the book. I mean, he used to be always in the intro telling you about the team and what was going to be happening in the game. So NHL 94 is by far my favorite game, sports game. I love that game.
All right, guys, we are back to Britt's Fantasy Blitz. And as promised, we're going to talk about tonight's game. It is between the Eagles and the Seattle Seahawks. And there's a little bit of a conundrum going on with both quarterbacks coming into this game questionable. We haven't yet received word on whether or not either will play. Make sure to go read the Showdown Playbook over at fantasyalarm.com, written by Dan Malin. Always a great write-up. But these are my breakdowns for tonight's game. My main concern / question is how will the quarterback availability and or health, even if they do play, affect the receivers and the game script in general? So first, let's go through some of these injuries. As we know, Jalen Hurts on Saturday, they said he had an illness, but he's expected to play. On Sunday morning, they said, well, actually, he worsened overnight and he's traveling separately and he still may not play. So news came out that he's definitely going to try and play. Well, of course he's going to try to play. That doesn't really tell us anything. Is he or is he not? So to answer Grumpy's question in the chat, we don't know yet whether or not he's going to play or how he's going to look, even if he does play. We saw Patrick Mahomes try to play in that flu game, and he did not look great. Again, it was in Denver. Maybe the altitude affected him. But it's definitely something to watch out for. The Eagles also changed defensive play callers, going to Matt Patricia as their defensive play caller. So will that change whether or not he calls more man coverage as opposed to the zone coverage? Because we know that the Eagles play zone at one of the highest rates in the league, and they've also given up the most points to the wide receiver position. So how's that going to affect it? We don't really know. For the Seahawks, Geno Smith obviously is questionable with a groin injury. Cornerback Devin Witherspoon is also questionable with a hip injury. He's been one of their standout corners all season long. So if he's unable to go, that's definitely going to open things up for the Eagles receivers, regardless of who is in at quarterback. And safety Jamal Adams is also questionable with a knee injury. So let's just jump into some of these heavy hitters here. I have the quarterbacks grouped together. So I have Jalen Hurts at 17,000 at the captain versus 11,000 in the flex versus Marcus Mariota at 9,000 in captain versus 6,000. Now there's a big disparity. So that to me, I think that Jalen Hurts is trending towards playing. Seattle also is only allowing 16.5 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, which is middle of the pack. But Hurts only had 8.9 fantasy points last week, and he is sick. So how is that going to affect him? Now, if he is healthy, he is averaging 23.2 fantasy points to the game, largely in part to that tush push. Is he going to fill up to running the ball if he has those aches, if he has those chills, if it is those flu-like symptoms? We just don't know. So I think I would steer away from Jalen Hurts, at least in this point, until we get a definitive answer of whether or not he's playing. Now, on the flip side, Geno Smith is 14,000 in the captain, 9,400 in the flex versus Drew Lock, 13,800 in the captain versus 9,200. Based on that salary alone, it's looking more likely that it's going to be Drew Lock over Geno Smith, but technically it is a game time decision. And last week, Lock was not bad at all. He went 22 of 31. He had 269 yards and 2 touchdowns, although he did have those 2 interceptions. I am very interested, as I mentioned, in seeing if the change at defensive play caller improves the secondary. But I think that both quarterbacks, regardless of who plays, are set up for a good spot against this defense, especially with Darius Slay out. Now we go to AJ Brown with Grumpy Sports Fan in the chat asking, I need 18 points, full PPR. I really hope that you get there, but also I am up 7 going up against a person playing AJ Brown. I have Devonta Smith and Jake Elliott. So I hope that you get yours, but I also hope that I squeeze out my win. I'm very, very nervous because I do think that AJ Brown has a good game. He had a few bad weeks against the Cowboys, Kansas City, and Buffalo, but against San Francisco and even Dallas the last 2 weeks, he's put up 8 for 114 and 9 for 94, even though he hasn't scored a touchdown in either of those games. I would definitely feel better about Brown if I knew whether or not Witherspoon was playing, because he has been such a difference maker lately. The Seahawks do rank 15th in DVOA versus the wide receiver 1 versus 27th against the wide receiver 2. But if Witherspoon doesn't play, it could be a very big day for AJ Brown. And again, I'm very, very nervous about it. The Seahawks play zone at the highest rate in the league, and AJ Brown does average 1.68 fantasy points per target versus zone. So if this game's close, Brown could definitely get there. Next up, I'm looking at DK Metcalf. He's averaging almost 17 yards per reception this season. He has 7 touchdowns on the year. And the Eagles defense is ranked 15th in DVOA against the wide receiver 1 and 30th against the wide receiver 2. But it really is going to depend on, again, that Matt Patricia change. Are they going to switch more to man or more to zone? They've been very good in zone and very susceptible in man. And Metcalf is better in zone coverage. So if they switch a little bit more towards man, I'm a little bit worried about what his production could be. Now, that said, Darius Slay, as we mentioned, is out. Bradley Roby is in the slot, and that moves up Keely Ringo. So I still really like that matchup. I'm not sure that Ringo is ready to go up against DK Metcalf. Moving on, again, on the other side of the ball with Devonta Smith. And again, I'm not just saying this because I need a great game out of Devonta Smith, but I really like him. We talked about those DVOA numbers, and they tend to lean towards him. He has also seen double-digit targets over the past 2 weeks. So he's pretty evenly matched in both zone and man coverage. He averages 2.03 fantasy points per targets against zone coverage, which the Seahawks play the most of. So I do like Devonta Smith in this matchup, even with AJ Brown. Now, moving on to DeAndre Swift. Now we're talking because I think, and this is just my personal opinion, but I think that even if Hurts plays, I'm not sure how he's going to feel and how pass heavy they're going to be. Obviously, Swift hasn't had a good couple of weeks, but he has had bad matchups and could be set up for a bounce back week. The Seahawks have allowed 123 rush yards per game. Swift has been getting nearly 50% of the snaps. He's averaged 4.62 yards per carry, and he does have some passing upside. So I really think that DeAndre Swift, out of all of these people, need to be locked in your lineup. Now, moving to some mid tier options and dart throws, we start out with Tyler Lockett. And, Lockett's overall fantasy numbers haven't been great this season. He's only found the end zone 4 times, but he's still getting a 22% target share, and he has had a few big games. With all the focus on DK Metcalf, I really do like Lockett to get a few more looks this game, and he did catch all 6 of his targets last week against the 49ers and their tough defense for 89 yards. Again, with Darius Slay out, the secondary gets even worse. At only 6,600 in the flex, I really like his return on value. Staying with the Seahawks, we also have Jackson Smith and Jigba at 5,600. And again, now we're talking for me. He's $1,000 cheaper than Lockett, and I know that he's had his ups and downs, but he's still had a 17.9% target share throughout the season. And the Eagles are also very bad against the slot receiver, allowing the second most fantasy points to the slot. With Drew Lock potentially in at quarterback as well, I think that the Eagles' pass rush gets to him. He's not able to make those deeper throws. So I think we see some of those safer passes and they go to the slot and JSN. And again, as the backup going into training camp, you can't undersell the fact that maybe he practiced a little bit more with JSN throughout the beginning of the season than he did with Lockett and Metcalf. Next up, we've got the Eagles kicker, Jake Elliott. And typically, I don't like kickers, but Elliott has been very solid all season long. He's averaging 9.4 fantasy points per game. And to start the season, he had 5 consecutive games of double-digit performances. If Philadelphia can't convert, if Jalen Hurts is a little hobbled, it may fall on Elliott to go get those points for the Eagles. And finally, Kenneth Gainwell at only 4,400. This is a dart throw, but for much of the same reasons that I like DeAndre Swift tonight, I like Gainwell. I don't feel like he has a big ceiling, but again, with Hurts ill, he may see a higher carry percentage than we're used to seeing because they tend to shift towards more of a run-heavy approach to keep Hurts just kind of in the game and move him to more of a game manager situation. So those are my breakdowns for tonight's showdown slate. Again, check out the whole playbook by Dan Malin over at fantasyalarm.com as part of the All Pro package. Look that up and everything else we have to offer when you sign up. Go to fantasyalarm.com/win, use promo code Let's Go, and get 50% off your first monthly payment. Now, before we go into the therapy session, because God knows we all need some therapy, Ryan is in the chat saying he needs 21 PPR points from JSN tonight. I think that could very well happen. I'm not saying that it will, but I would give it a 60% chance of getting 21 points from Ryan. Angie is also in the chat saying that she made the exact same mistake and I'm just sick about it. I feel like Zay Flowers completely duped us all. And I feel like it's not on him, that the Ravens have done that all season long. They just can't figure out what their identity is. We were told early on in the season that they were going to be this air raid offense, and they ran at the heaviest rate in the league. Now, recently we've seen them throw up balls to OBJ and Zay Flowers, and it just fantasy. I want everybody to know that fantasy is a lot of skill, and I'm not downplaying the skill, but it is also a lot of luck. And sometimes you just can't predict what is going to happen. And that's why we're going to go into our fantasy therapy session right now. We've taken some of the laments and issues that you guys have sent in on Twitter and X, but also the therapist needs some therapy too, right? I've already alluded to that. So we're going to start with some of my issues with week 15. Our wonderful producer, Brian Burns, also apparently moonlights as a fantasy therapist. So he has been very kind to offer to help me deal with my issues. So, producer Burns, am I good to come in for my appointment? Knock, knock, knock.
What can we expect for you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Your heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
Yes.
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed. And they're 3 wide into the first turn. Woo! Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138 and 2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through. Come on! Come on! Let's go! Take it! Yeah! Keith Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire. Over Mark Malusis.
That was so cool. The champ is here. Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush. You were doing the Instagram live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? What are you? David, the driver, was awesome. He's like, we're going to win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose on the loose. Watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations. And no matter what, you could always hold this over Moose's head.
Yeah!
All right, I'm laying on the couch. I'm ready to get some things off of my chest in the therapy lounge of Britt's Fantasy Blitz. And again, producer Brian Burns also moonlights as a fantasy therapist, and I'm so ready to just talk about what happened.
Yes, Britt. I have in my notes that you've been experiencing some anger issues. Let's dive into that.
I do have a lot of anger, particularly against Arthur Smith and his usage of Bijan Robinson. I'm sure that this is going to be a topic that you're going to hear all week long, but this usage was absolutely insane. I was a little nervous about the status of the Falcons' offensive line going into the game, but they were going against the worst run defense in the entire league, not just for fantasy points, but also in DVOA. Why did Bijan only have 7 carries to Tyler Algier's 14 and Cordero Patterson's 5? Why was Bijan out there blocking for the Patterson touchdown that should have gone to him? Yes, I know that he fumbled, But you know what? It was a rain game. It was disgusting. It could have happened to anyone. Why, on God's green earth, are you treating your top 10 pick this way? It's the worst thing that he has done since not letting us know that Bijan was sick in the middle part of the season. I think that he deserves to go back to FedEx to learn how to manage a company and his team and a team. And I was honestly looking to potentially glitter bomb send him because I was that angry.
It's important to control your anger and realize that, everyone has their own struggles. And, it was a tough game with the rain and all that. And, that can't be easy on anybody. So let's try and get some empathy going here. But I understand where your anger is coming from. In the past, Britt, you've experienced some anxiety. How's that going for you?
I'm still dealing with anxiety quite a bit, specifically because of what we've talked about earlier about the Jalen Hurts situation. Jalen Hurts has carried me to an 11-2 record in this whole entire fantasy season. And then I heard yesterday that he's downgraded to questionable because he's sick. So I put in Sam Howell, who was sitting at QB6 going into the week. I thought that that was a very solid start because I couldn't risk taking a 0. But then Ron Rivera decided to bench him for Jacoby Brissett in the second half, and he allowed Brissett to complete 2 touchdowns in an attempt to come back in the fourth quarter. Now, instead of those points going to Hal, he only ended up with 11-something points. Ron Rivera still said, well, we were just protecting our quarterback. Well, protecting him for what? You're not in the playoffs. You were obviously attempting to sabotage our fantasy playoffs. And now, in a game where I was favored by 40 points going into the week, I'm only favored by 12 going into tonight's game. Ron Rivera has caused me so much anxiety that I feel like it's going to give me a heart attack.
That's very common for people with high anxiety, but I've looked at your tests from your other general practitioner, and health wise, physically, you're great. You don't have to worry about a heart attack. It's just the anxiety, and just refill your prescription that I got you last time, and you should be good to go on that. As far as your sadness, how's that going?
It goes along with the anxiety. I think that those are comorbid together, but Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys caused me a lot of sadness, and they do this to me every year. They always look so good going down the stretch, and then they just crumble in the big moments. But it's not even that. I, expected maybe the Bills to win. They were playing on the road. There was a little bit of rain. But what I didn't expect was for every positional player to completely disappear, including Dak Prescott. Only 134 yards, 1 interception. That was it. You were in the MVP conversation going into yesterday, and now no one's even going to consider you. Not only is my fandom hurt, but as I mentioned earlier, I started you in a big playoff game against our own Howard Bender, and he made me look silly. And I'm just very, very sad about the situation.
Well, Britt, you have the trifecta of madness, sadness, and anxiety going on. You've made a lot of progress through our sessions, but I think I'm going to have to prescribe you something from my private pharmacy. I'll just write you the prescription, and you come over to my place. I'll fill it for you, and it should get you all fixed up for that. So I think, made a lot of progress today, and we'll keep working.
Well, thank you so much for listening to me and allowing me to get this off of my chest because it is something that's been bothering me a ton throughout the past 12 hours. And I already feel a lot better talking to you. So thank you so much for being there. I will see you next week or maybe even after tonight, after the game, and we'll see where we stand. But after my therapy session, now it's time to throw on the glasses and become the therapist to all of you guys. And I need to get professional here. I need to put on the jacket. I need to put on the glasses so that I look the part for what's going on, even if I have to get a little bit out of frame to do this. So as I mentioned, you guys told me some things on Twitter that really upset you and caused you pain. throughout the fantasy playoffs yesterday. And here are some of the big responses on Twitter that we got. From Pete at Arctic_orange. Didn't pick up the Raiders defense and played Atlanta instead. Started Higgins over Bijan. And last but not least, dropped CEH for Mariota. Could have started CEH over Bijan. Again, it's that panic. It's that anxiety. These are just some things that happen. You were trying to do what's best for your team. And as I mentioned earlier, just because your process didn't work doesn't mean that it wasn't the right move. So you have to feel good with what you did there. Sometimes it just is what it is. Rachel at Tootsie Pop 6 on Twitter said that she stupidly trusted Gabe Davis yet again. Gabe Davis has been the ultimate rug puller for all of us in not just fantasy, not just in the playoffs, but even in real life. He is a guy who's been doing this for so long. We're all looking back and living in the past. I think that it's just time to move on from Gabe Davis and think that there's somebody out there better for you who's actually into you, Rachel. We've also got some things from our better boss, Matt Deutsch, asking, where do I start? Screwed out of the playoff bye week with a poor tie break, Michael Pittman injury, Derrick Henry and Saquon letdowns, only played the Jets defense because Tyreek was out. Otherwise, it's the Titans D. And then where's George Kittle's 3-touchdown game? You know, you cannot count on injuries. It goes back to that thing about fantasy football being part luck and part skill. You could not account for DeMonte Casey taking out Michael Pittman. Derrick Henry historically has performed very well against the Texans. He's had 200 plus yard games in every game that he's played. You cannot count on that. You cannot blame yourself for what's going on. I think that it's time for a little self-acceptance and just know that your process was still good and is still there. Wendy also in the Twitter sphere said got knocked out of Battle of the Sexes this week. When Desmond Ridder is your only quarterback in a super flex, it does not bode well. And Wendy, I just have to provide some context for our listeners out there. Battle of the Sexes is a super flex or is a best ball. There are no waivers. There's nothing that you can do. You do not have a crystal ball. Your process was very good because not only did you get a bye, you took it down to the very last week competing with me to get that bye. So what you did this season in Battle of the Sexes, you should be very proud of. And just know that you did very, very well going into this season. Again, Nate Paul vote Bijan Robinson. We've already touched on that. We are kindred spirits when it comes to that. And then Bump Bailey at the Bump Bailey says, my squad is anchored by Tyreek, Allen, and Diggs. Again, you cannot predict injuries. You cannot count on that. Do not let yourself go into the whiskey bottle, as I see by your whiskey glass emoji that you put there. What you did was great. It was just a strike of bad luck that we cannot always predict. If you guys have more things that you want to put out in the fantasy football therapy sesh, please tweet me at Britt_Flinn on Twitter/X. We will get into more of that. But unfortunately, we're nearing the end of the show and we need to jump in to some sleeper picks for tonight. Because as you know, Sleeper and all of our friends over there are our sponsor at Britt's Fantasy Blitz. And they're also offering a new giveaway called Santa's $1 million Picks giveaway on the Sleeper app. You can play picks between now and Christmas to enter, choose higher or lower on individual player stats, get them all correct, and then you win. You can pick from a variety of statistical categories in the NFL and NBA, add additional players to increase your payout. Each entry pick must be at least $5 to qualify, with up to 4 entries daily per user, and winners will be randomly chosen on 12/26. The more you play, the more chances you have to win, and the top 10 prizes are fully withdrawable. So keep that in mind. So let's get into a couple of these for me tonight. With all the questions at quarterback, I'm only running through 3. The first one being DK Metcalf, more than 63.5 receiving yards at 1.73 times multiplier. This does obviously get a little bit more complicated because we don't know who the quarterback will be, but I think based purely on matchup and the fact that Darius Slay is out, that DK Metcalf is going to hit this. The Eagles have allowed the most points in the league to the wide receiver position, and this is largely based on the number of yards they give up. They're only giving up 0.2 touchdowns per game to the wide receiver, but they're giving up 193.8 yards per game. So, as Seattle's number one wide receiver, I really expect him to hit this number. Next, we mentioned Jackson Smith-Njigba earlier. I think he has a great game. I'm going Jackson Smith-Njigba more than 42.5 receiving yards at 1.73 times. We mentioned it, as bad as the Eagles have been against receivers as a whole, they're especially bad against slot receivers. I think Drew Lock is going to see a lot of pressure and look towards the shorter routes that Jackson Smith-Njigba sees. So give me more than 42.5 receiving yards for him. Finally, I'm looking for DeAndre Swift to have more than 57.5 rushing yards at a 1.73 time multiplier. With the uncertainty at quarterback for the Eagles, we keep going back to that. Even if Jalen Hurts plays, I think that they may rely on the running game. Fortunately for them, the Seahawks are allowing 123 rushing yards per game. Swift's usage has been great. I really expect him to be in a good spot here. So that wraps up our sleeper picks of the day. And again, to sign up, go to fantasyalarm.com/sleeper, use the promo code VAULT3, and first-time users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Scan the QR code on the screen on your mobile device, and it'll take you right to it. So that's going to end our show. Again, this hour has just flown by. I really hope everybody wins their matchups tonight, gets everything that they need to move on to week 16, myself included. So make sure to check everything out. Download that BetterCast app. Go get that All Pro subscription. Coming up next from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, we have the Better Sports Betting Show with Dan Servadidio and John Impemba, followed by the NBA DFS Live Show with John Impemba and James Grande. Make sure to tune back in on Friday for Britt's Fantasy Blitz as we get ready for Week 16 after you guys win your matchups and advance to the next round. Until then, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our producer and my therapist, Brian Burns. And until Friday, thanks for getting blitzed.